Alrighty. Hello, folks. My name is Oliver Girouard, and this is my presentation titled Trees on the Move, Assisted Population Migration in Washington State. I'll start us out with some background here. Natural tree migration cannot keep pace with climate change. This is due to two factors. The first being that trees migrate and reproduce rather slowly. So from the time like a tree seed germinates, it could be anywhere from 10 to 20 years before that tree grows mature enough to produce seed of its own. Can be compared to like a standard annual flower, which might grow from seed and then produce seed of its own all within one growing season. The second reason is that the climate is changing, as we know, and temperatures are increasing. And these warmer temperatures are shifting northward and to higher elevations at a rate faster than trees can naturally migrate in our region. So assisted population migration, or APM, is emerging as a potential adaptation strategy. To understand what APM is, we first have to understand what it is not. APM is not assisted species migration. That would look like moving redwoods from California to Washington State. APM is not assisted range expansion. That would be like moving redwoods slightly beyond the species' current range, beginning to slowly encroach into Oregon. Assisted population migration is within an entire species' current range, moving populations of that species to different locations. In our region, this is commonly done through, getting populations at the southern edge of a species and moving them a little bit more northward or to higher elevations, with the idea that you're gathering genotypes from the southern edge that might be more adapted to drought or heat stress. APM right now is in the research phase, so practitioners are seeing if it is a good climate adaptation strategy for these tree species. However, implementation remains fragmented and nursery capacity is not well understood. But therefore, this project investigates current APM projects and APM seedling nursery supply. This brings us to my research question, which is, what is the current scope of assisted population migration in Washington State? Let me jump into my internship and methods here. I interned with Oxbow Farm and Conservation Center, and I worked specifically with their native plant nursery. And I actually got my hands dirty with a couple species that had APM components. I helped sow, I believe, 9 populations of big leaf maple. And then I also kind of spearheaded an APM project with Western red cedar, where I sourced seeds from Coos Bay, Oregon, through the Coos Watershed Association. Special thank you to them. And I grew those and tried to compare them to seeds from the Snoqualmie Basin, which is where Oxbow is in. I believe I sowed about 2,000 seeds for each species, but unfortunately the seeds from the Snoqualmie Basin were no longer viable. So I only had one germinate out of like 2,000. I do believe I got about 60 to 70% germination though on the Coos Bay seeds. Again, I was hoping to like compare these two lots and maybe have them be outplanted as a restoration and research project, but that didn't happen. However, I also administered a survey to every native plant nursery in Washington State, and I conducted an online landscape scan to identify ongoing APM research. Move on to my results here. So here we have this map I created of every APM research project in Washington State. There's a couple things about this map. All the green markers represent smaller scale initiatives or research projects. Those are like maybe run by nonprofits or like county level research projects. And the red markers are those that are like run by the federal government, so like the USDA or the Forest Service. There are 9 research projects total, but as you can see, there are more than 9 markers on the map. This is because some research projects have multiple research sites to study APM species, and the markers themselves represent research sites or research clusters because some of them are clustered very close together when in certain areas, especially in the Puget Sound area. The biggest project was one called eNames, which was a joint venture between the USDA and the Forest Service. eNames stands for Experimental Network of Assisted Migration and Establishment Silviculture. All of these markers with red on them, they studied either ponderosa pine or Douglas fir. Together, all of these markers, green and red, they mostly studied timber species, also including western red cedar. A couple of the projects, though, marked with green also studied big leaf maple or civic madrone, interestingly. All right, moving on to my survey results. We can see here that the native plant nursery industry in Washington is pretty evenly split between those that do and those that do not supply APM seedlings. But what I think is the most interesting finding here is the one in the middle, where some nurseries are unsure if they supply APM stock. And I provided a definition of APM in the survey I sent out, and it still seems that it's a little bit confusing. I know practitioners are limited on time when they're filling out these surveys, so that can be a component as well. Also interesting is that two of the nurseries that did say that they do provide APM stock, later in the survey when they responded on what species were APM, they said like redwood or kinnikinick. And so they were just describing assisted species migration and getting it confused with APM, which is, an honest mistake. But it kind of shows that awareness among native plant nurseries is relatively low. So this leads me to my takeaways to answer my research question, which is within Washington state, APM efforts are clustered near Puget Sound and the eastern half of the state. Some nurseries are carrying APM stock, but a significant portion are not aware of the concept. Move on to my implications now. So 8 nursery providers cannot meet scaled APM restoration demand. Remember when I said that APM is currently in the research phase, right? But if efforts were ever to take a more targeted approach to actually specifically migrate these species to protect them, that would need a lot more nurseries or a lot more nursery capacity. So, in preparation for this, awareness should probably be built now among the nurseries that at the very least don't know about APM. They don't have to build capacity, but they should have the knowledge about the practice. Next up is that ecologically important trees like big leaf maple are only represented by one project. So future management decisions for understudied species would rest on very thin evidence base. And lastly, projects should prioritize open documentation of data and research designs. Transparent, community-involved APM will build awareness and engage the communities these forests exist to serve. During my research, a couple of those green markers on the map I showed earlier, a couple of those projects had the community very involved in the APM projects that were being undertaken, whether that was through the community planting the seedlings themselves, or they would actually have the community conducting measurements and then recording that data. And then one project also had the data, a couple of them actually had open access data. So citizen scientists could download this from a GitHub repository and then mess with the data themselves. And this is very, very important to build awareness of APM and also, build interest in it, because it's if it were to be seriously considered as a large, widespread restoration tactic, it would be an all hands on deck kind of approach. So with that, thank you so much for attending my capstone video here. I would love to thank the wonderful team at Oxbow, who is all super kind, especially my site supervisor, Leah Daiga. I would also love to extend my thanks to my scholarly mentor, Matthew Eghai. Also, the Program of the Environment staff are super helpful, and I love them so much. Thank you to my capstone peers. You guys are amazing. And thank you to my friends, partner, and family for supporting me. Cheers.